Welcome everyone. I'm Andrés Calvo Espinosa and this is OptimFlow's Leadership, the channel I've been wanting to create for a long time. Here, we are going to talk about organizational culture, ethical people management, leadership, transparency, internal communication, and all those invisible dynamics that, although they rarely appear in official reports or annual statements, end up deeply shaping how work is actually done inside a company. But before diving fully into specific problems, consequences, bad practices, and possible solutions, I think it's worth starting this first video with the most important thing: establishing a solid foundation. So today we are going to answer a fundamental question. What do we really mean by organizational culture? Because it's a concept that is used a lot, but not always explained well. Sometimes it's confused with corporate values, the work environment, employee benefits, the company's external image, or even the personal style of those who lead it. And although all of that can be related, organizational culture is something deeper. Organization culture is the set of ways of thinking, deciding, communicating, and acting that are repeated within a company or any organization. It is what shapes, formally or informally, how things are done, how work is understood, how people relate to one another, and which behaviors end up being accepted, valued, or rejected. It is not only about what appears written in an internal presentation, on a website, or in an onboarding manual. That may be part of the declared culture, but not necessarily the real culture. A company may say that it values innovation, transparency, respect, or professional development, but the real culture is observed in everyday life. In how decisions are made, in how people are listened to, in how a mistake is handled, in how someone who thinks differently is treated, in how a conflict is resolved, or in what happens when a person points out something that is not working. That is why, when we talk about organizational culture, we are not talking only about intention. We are talking about practice. We are talking about the habits that are repeated, about the decisions that become normalized, about the conversations that are allowed, about the silences that take root, about the criteria used to recognize, promote, correct, or limit a person. And also about the distance that may exist between what an organization says it wants to be and what it actually demonstrates in its day-to-day functioning. Organizational culture does not appear overnight. It is formed over time, sometimes consciously, when a company defines values, processes, internal policies, and leadership styles, and other times completely unconsciously, simply through repetition. If important decisions in a company are explained clearly, a culture more oriented toward trust is created. If decisions are made opacally, without visible criteria, or depending on informal relationships, a culture more based on suspicion or internal politics can emerge. If mistakes are analyzed in order to learn, the organization can develop a culture of improvement. If mistakes are punished disproportionately or used to single people out, a culture of fear, concealment, or defensiveness is more likely to appear. If leadership truly listens, accepts nuance, and allows difficult conversations, the culture will tend to be more open. If leadership only listens to what confirms its own vision, the culture can become complacent, silent, or dependent on hierarchical approval. So, where is organizational culture defined? It is defined in many places at the same time. It is defined in leadership because people with formal power have an enormous influence over what is considered acceptable or unacceptable inside the company. Not only because what they say, but because of how they act. A leader may talk about respect, but if they constantly interrupt, ridicule others, avoid taking responsibility, or use information as a form of control, the message that reaches the team is not the official speech, but the repeated behavior. It is also defined in processes, in how people are hired, how a new person is onboarded, how performance is evaluated, how growth opportunities are given, how changes are communicated, how complaints are managed, and how conflicts are addressed. Processes are important because they reduce arbitrariness. When the criteria are clear, people can understand what is expected of them and how decisions are made. When processes are confusing or depend too much on informal perceptions, the door opens to misunderstandings, favoritism, rumors, and decisions that are difficult to explain. Culture is also defined by what is rewarded and what is tolerated. A company may say it values collaboration, but if it always recognizes only the person who achieves individual results, regardless of how they achieve them, it is sending a very specific message. It may say it values well-being, but if in practice it rewards constant availability, it is building a different culture. It may say it wants critical and autonomous people, but if it penalizes those who ask uncomfortable questions, what it ends up cultivating is obedience or silence. Another place where culture is defined is internal communication, not only on official announcements, but in the way information circulates. What is communicated? When it is communicated, who has access to certain information? How decisions are explained? And what space exists to ask questions or disagree? Here, a point appears that is fundamental: transparency. But it is important to clarify this properly. Transparency does not mean telling absolutely everything or exposing confidential information. There are matters that, for legal, personal, strategic, or protective reasons, must be handled confidentially. Transparency does not consist of turning the company into a shop window where everything is displayed without a filter. Rather, it means that processes are understandable, that criteria are known, that relevant decisions can be explained, and that people do not feel their professional development depends on invisible rules. For example, it is not always possible to communicate every detail of a salary decision, an internal investigation, or a commercial strategy, but it is possible to explain how salary bands work, what criteria are used for promotions, how performance is evaluated, what channels cease to raise a concern, or what steps the organization follows when a conflict appears. That difference is important because confidentiality is often confused with opacity. Confidentiality protects sensitive information. Opacity, when unjustified, can end up protecting arbitrariness, unclear decisions, or power dynamics that no one dares to question. Organizational culture is also defined by unwritten rules. These rules are especially interesting because they usually do not appear in any document, but everyone perceives them. They are those ideas that circulate informally. Here, it is better not to contradict anyone. Here, asking too many questions is frowned upon. Here, it is better to look good than to tell the truth. Here, anyone who complains gets marked. Here, in order to grow, you have to get close to certain people. Here, the person who is always available is rewarded, even if they are burnt out. The opposite can also happen. Here, you can speak clearly. Here, effort is recognized. Here, mistakes are handled maturely. Here, private life is respected. Here, processes matter. Here, leadership listens. Here, you do not need to pretend in order to be valued. These unwritten rules are a central part of culture, precisely because they strongly influence behavior. People adapt to their environment. If the environment rewards honesty, more honesty will appear. If it rewards appearances, more appearances will appear. If it rewards internal politics, people will learn to move politically. If it rewards good work and genuine collaboration, those behaviors are more likely to grow. That is why organizational culture is not something abstract. It has very concrete effects on motivation, trust, innovation, team health, and an organization's ability to learn. A healthy culture makes it easier for people to work with clarity, with reasonable criteria, and with a certain degree of psychological safety. That does not mean everything is comfortable, that there is no pressure, or that everyone likes every decision. A company can make difficult decisions and still have a serious culture if those decisions are explained, supported by criteria, and applied with respect. A damaged culture, on the other hand, usually generates confusion, fear, exhaustion, and defensive behaviors. People start to measure their words too carefully, protect themselves, avoid sharing information, avoid taking risks, avoid visible mistakes, or manage their image more than their real contribution. And when that happens, the problem is no longer only human. It is also organizational, because a company where people cannot speak clearly, where criteria are not visible, or where rumors carry more weight than facts, loses the ability to learn, innovate, and make good decisions. Here, another topic comes in, an important one, that I will develop in other videos. The difference between evaluating facts and being carried away by informal perceptions. In any organization, there may be comments, impressions, corridor conversation, or personal judgments. That is part of social life. But a mature company should not base important decisions about the person on rumors or on aspects of their private life that have no demonstrable connection to their work. If someone's development, professional evolution, or ability to take on responsibility is going to be assessed, the minimum should be to look at facts, performance, impact, professional behavior, results, collaboration, and alignment with the organization's real values. That does not mean ignoring behavioral problems if they exist. If there is a situation that affects the team, safety, ethics, legal compliance, or the work environment, it must be addressed. But it must be done through a serious process, with verified information, with the right to respond, and with clear criteria. The alternative is very dangerous, that the organization begins to make decisions based on rumors, personal sympathy, discomfort, or moral judgment. And when that happens, the culture becomes contaminated, because people learn that working well is not enough. They also have to constantly control the perception that others create about them. That is why, when we talk about organizational culture, we are not talking only about nice values. We are talking about power, processes, coherence, communication, and ethics applied to people management. And this leads us to a basic idea. Culture is not changing only through speeches. It is changed by modifying behaviors, processes, and consequences. If an organization wants a more transparent culture, it must reveal how it communicates and how it explains its decisions. If it wants a fairer culture, it must review its criteria for evaluation, promotion, and recognition. If it wants a more innovative culture, it must review how it treats mistakes and disagreement. If it wants a more human culture, it must reveal how it manages pressure, conflict, and boundaries. If it wants a more ethical culture, it must reveal which behaviors it allows, even when they produce results. Because many times, the true culture message is not found in what the company declares, but in what it is willing to tolerate when it suits its interests. A person may read flawless corporate values, but if they later see that the person who humiliates others gets promoted, that the person who manipulates others is protected, that the person who asks questions gets marked, or that someone who genuinely contributes does not grow because they do not fit into certain informal circles, they will understand perfectly well what the real culture is. Culture is learned by observing. It is learned by seeing what happens after speaking up. What happens after making a mistake? What happens after reporting bad practice? What happens when someone with power crosses a line? What happens when a highly capable person does not have a good relationship with those who hold informal influence? What happens when there is a choice between internal comfort and justice? So, to close this first introduction, I would say that organizational culture is the living system of behaviors, decisions, processes, and relationships that defines how work is truly done inside an organization. It is not only what is said, it is not only what is written, it is not only what is communicated outwardly. It is what is practiced repeatedly. And understanding this matters because it allows us to stop talking about culture as if it were something decorative and start seeing it as a concrete responsibility. A responsibility of leadership, but also of organizational design, ethical management, and coherence. In the next videos, I want to go into more specific topics: how a culture deteriorates, what role transparency plays, how rumors and informalization affect people, what consequences poor people management has, how talent can be protected without falling into favoritism, and what it really means to manage people ethically. But I wanted to start here with the foundation, understanding that organizational culture is not a phrase on a wall, but the way a company functions when people are working, deciding, communicating, and living together every day. That is where culture is seen, and that is also where it can be transformed. Thank you very much for being here.